Christmas Eve is supposed to be a night of warmth, laughter, and family. But imagine watching your home burst into flames, desperately screaming for your children trapped inside, only to discover that 5 of them vanished without a trace. No bodies, no remains, no answers. Were they burned alive, kidnapped, or did someone make sure the truth would never be found? Nearly 80 years later, the disappearance of the Sodder children remains one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries, and what you're about to hear may completely change what you believe happened that night. Welcome to the Midnight Archive, where forgotten mysteries, disturbing discoveries, and history's darkest secrets are brought back into the light. Tonight, we're uncovering one of the most heartbreaking and mysterious disappearances in American history: the Sodder Children mystery. Fayetteville, West Virginia, December 24, 1945. The Second World War had just ended. Across America, families were celebrating peace for the first time in years. Homes were decorated with Christmas lights. Church bells echoed through quiet towns. Children waited impatiently for Christmas morning, dreaming about presents waiting beneath decorated trees. The Sodder family was no different. George and Jenny Sodder had built what many considered the American dream. George had immigrated to the United States from Italy as a teenager. He arrived with almost nothing: no money, no family, no guarantees. Through years of hard work, he built a successful trucking business that supplied coal throughout West Virginia. Friends described him as intelligent, determined, and fiercely protective of his family. He wasn't afraid to speak his mind. Sometimes, that created enemies. George openly criticized Benito Mussolini and the fascist government in Italy. While many people ignored politics after the war, George argued passionately with anyone who defended Mussolini. Most arguments ended with angry words, but one would later haunt investigators forever. Jenny Sodder devoted her life to raising their 10 children. Their large white home overlooked the hills outside Fayetteville. It wasn't luxurious, but it was filled with laughter. Christmas decorations covered the living room. The smell of homemade food drifted through the house. Children ran from room to room, too excited to sleep. Everything about the evening felt ordinary, comfortable, safe. No one inside that house could imagine it would become one of America's greatest mysteries before sunrise. As darkness settled over Fayetteville, neighbors exchanged holiday greetings. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the cold winter air wrapped around the quiet town. Inside the Sodder home, wrapping paper covered the floor. The younger children admired their new toys. 5 of them, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and little Betty, were especially excited. They begged their mother to stay awake a little longer. Christmas only came once a year. Jenny finally agreed. The older children were already preparing for bed. George completed a few last-minute tasks before heading upstairs. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing suggested danger. But strange events had already begun. Earlier that day, a telephone call reached the house. When Jenny answered, an unfamiliar woman asked for someone who didn't live there. The voice sounded odd. There was laughter in the background, people talking. Then, the woman quietly hung up. It felt strange, but wrong numbers happened all the time. Jenny ignored it. Later that evening, another unexpected visitor appeared. A man drove onto the property claiming he wanted to find work. Instead of asking about trucking, he stared toward the roof. Pointing near the fuse box, he reportedly smiled and said, "That thing is going to cause a fire someday." George found the comment unsettling, especially because the electrical wiring had recently been inspected. Everything had been declared perfectly safe. He dismissed the visitor, but he never forgot those words. Several months earlier, an insurance salesman had visited the house. George refused to purchase a policy. The discussion became heated. According to family members, the salesman angrily warned George that his house would one day burn to the ground. At the time, it sounded like an empty threat. Now, those words seemed impossible to ignore. Just after 10 p.m., George and Jenny went upstairs to sleep. Some of the older children remained awake downstairs for a while, before eventually heading to bed. 5 younger children chose to sleep together in rooms on the lower floor. It was cozy. They enjoyed staying close to one another during Christmas. Outside, the roads became quiet. The town fell asleep. Then, around 12:30 in the morning, Jenny suddenly woke. A loud crashing sound echoed through the house. It sounded like something heavy striking the roof. She listened carefully. Silence. Nothing else happened. Assuming a branch had fallen from a nearby tree, she returned to bed. Minutes later, she woke again. This time, she smelled smoke. When she opened the bedroom door, she froze. Flames were already climbing the walls near George's office. Within seconds, smoke filled the upstairs hallway. Jenny screamed for George. He jumped from bed. The fire spread unbelievably fast. They rushed to wake the children sleeping upstairs. Chaos erupted. George shouted for everyone to get outside, one by one. The older children escaped through doors and windows. Smoke swallowed every room. George counted the children standing outside. Then his heart stopped. 5 were missing. Martha, Louis, Jenny, Betty, still inside. George immediately turned back toward the burning house. He tried reaching the downstairs bedrooms. The flames blocked every entrance. Heat blasted through the windows. The staircase collapsed before he could reach it. Jenny screamed the children's names over and over. Neighbors rushed across the road. Everyone searched desperately for a way inside. George remembered the ladder leaning against the house. He ran toward its usual location. It was gone. Completely gone. Someone had moved it. There wasn't time to think. George ran toward one of his coal trucks. If he couldn't reach the children through the doors, he would climb onto the truck, jump onto the roof, and break through the upper windows. He climbed into the first truck. The engine wouldn't start. Impossible. It had worked perfectly the day before. He jumped into the second truck. Nothing. Dead. Both trucks, completely useless. Panic overwhelmed him. He grabbed a barrel filled with rainwater, threw it toward the fire. It did almost nothing. The flames roared higher. Neighbors called the local fire department. But another disaster struck. The town's telephone operator couldn't immediately reach firefighters. Messages had to be delivered in person. Precious minutes disappeared. George stood helplessly outside, watching his family home burn. The children who escaped cried uncontrollably. Jenny collapsed onto the frozen ground. Everyone expected the worst. The fire continued burning through the night. Finally, hours later, the local fire department arrived. By then, there was almost nothing left to save. Only smoking ruins remained. Firefighters searched the ashes. Everyone expected to recover 5 small bodies. Instead, investigators found something almost impossible to believe. Nothing. No complete skeletons. No identifiable human remains. No bones belonging to 5 children. The official explanation came quickly. Authorities declared that the fire had burned so intensely, the children's bodies had been completely destroyed. The case appeared closed, but George Sodder refused to believe it. He had spent years hauling coal. He understood fire. He knew buildings. And one simple question refused to leave his mind. If 5 children really died inside that house, where were their remains? The fire was finally extinguished just before dawn. The once beautiful Sodder home had become nothing more than a pile of blackened timber, twisted metal, and smoking ashes. Neighbors stood silently around the ruins. No one knew what to say. Christmas morning had arrived. But there would be no gifts, no celebration. Only heartbreak. George refused to leave the property. While firefighters packed away their equipment, he walked slowly through the ruins himself, searching with his bare hands. Every parent knows the feeling of refusing to give up hope. Even when logic says otherwise, the heart keeps searching. George expected to find something: a shoe, a toy, a piece of clothing, anything. Instead, there was almost nothing. The official investigation lasted only a short time. Authorities concluded the children had died inside the house. according to the report. The intense heat had completely cremated their bodies. The case was closed almost immediately, but George couldn't accept the explanation. The more he thought about it, the less sense it made. Over the years, George had seen homes destroyed by fires far larger than his. Human bones almost always remained, even after extremely hot fires. Yet investigators claimed 5 children's bodies had completely disappeared. Not a single identifiable bone, not a single tooth, nothing. George began asking experts. He contacted funeral directors, fire investigators, people experienced with cremations. Again and again, he received nearly the same answer. A normal house fire rarely becomes hot enough to reduce an entire human body to nothing. Modern crematoriums operate at temperatures far higher than residential fires. Even then, bone fragments almost always remain. That answer changed everything. If the children hadn't burned, then where were they? The more George searched for answers, the stranger the story became. Neighbors began remembering unusual events from the days before the fire. One man reported seeing someone throwing what looked like a strange object onto the Sodder roof shortly before the flames erupted. At first, nobody paid much attention. Then George remembered the loud crashing sound Jenny had heard just before smelling smoke. The memories suddenly fit together. Months later, one of George's sons found a strange rubber-like object in the yard. It looked unlike anything they had ever seen. Some investigators later believed it resembled an early incendiary device, a type of object designed to start fires after being thrown onto a roof. Although no one could prove exactly what it was, the discovery deepened the family's suspicions. Then another mystery surfaced: the telephone line. Authorities originally believed the fire had damaged it, but when George inspected the property, he noticed something impossible. The telephone wire hadn't burned, it had been cut. Not snapped, not melted. Cut. Whoever did it had climbed the telephone pole before the fire even started. Someone had deliberately prevented the family from calling for help. George immediately informed investigators. To him, this wasn't an accident anymore. Someone had planned everything. Then came another shocking discovery. A local man later admitted seeing another individual stealing the Sodder family's extension ladder before the fire. The missing ladder, the one George desperately searched for while trying to rescue his children, hadn't simply disappeared. Someone had removed it. Investigators finally recovered the ladder. It wasn't lying near the house. It had been abandoned down an embankment some distance away. Why would anyone move it? No one could explain. Then there were George's trucks. For years they had started without problems. On the very night of the fire, both engines mysteriously failed. Mechanics later examined them. Some believed the vehicles had been tampered with. Whether that was true or not, George remained convinced someone wanted to make absolutely certain he couldn't save his children. Every answer seemed to create 2 new questions. Weeks passed. Then months. The Sodder family refused to move on. George placed advertisements in newspapers offering rewards for information. He printed thousands of flyers containing photographs of the missing children. He personally traveled across several states, chasing every possible lead. Phone calls poured in from strangers, claiming they had seen children matching the missing siblings. One woman insisted she had served breakfast to several frightened children traveling with unfamiliar adults shortly after Christmas. She remembered one little girl looking directly at her before one of the adults angrily pulled her away. Another witness claimed to have seen children inside a passing vehicle during the early morning hours of Christmas Day. According to the report, the children appeared frightened. An adult quickly drew the curtains shut after noticing they had been seen. Investigators followed the lead. Nothing was ever confirmed. Another woman working at a tourist hotel later claimed she had seen several children resembling the Sodder siblings, accompanied by 2 men and 2 women. She said she tried speaking with them. The adults immediately became defensive and refused to allow any conversation. Again, The trail disappeared. Most police departments dismissed these reports as mistaken identity. But George collected every single one. He filled boxes with letters, maps, witness statements, photographs, receipts, anything that might help locate his children. Years passed, yet he refused to remove the family's Christmas decorations. Every December, he continued hoping that one day the missing children would walk back through the front door. Then, a new investigation uncovered another disturbing fact. The official fire report itself contained serious problems. Years after the tragedy, George learned that the county coroner had quietly placed several animal bones into the ashes before informing the family they belonged to the missing children. Why? According to later explanations, the coroner believed George needed closure. He wanted the grieving parents to accept that their children had died. But the discovery had the opposite effect. Instead of creating closure, it destroyed the family's trust in the investigation. If officials had secretly planted bones, what else had they hidden? The Sodders became convinced the original investigation had been rushed. Critical evidence had been ignored. Important witnesses had never been fully interviewed. Too many strange events had been dismissed as coincidences. George refused to let the case disappear. He spent thousands of dollars building one of the most unusual billboards in American history. Standing beside a busy highway, it displayed large photographs of the 5 missing children. Beneath them, a message asked the public for information. The reward grew larger over the years. $5,000, then $10,000, eventually reaching an amount that would equal a fortune today. For decades, travelers passing through West Virginia saw the faces of the missing Sodder children staring back at them. The billboard became a symbol of hope and heartbreak. People from across America mailed letters offering theories. Some believed organized crime had kidnapped the children. Others suspected revenge connected to George's outspoken political opinions. A few believed the children had accidentally witnessed something they should never have seen. Every theory sounded unbelievable, yet none could be completely dismissed, because one fact remained unchanged. No one had ever proven the children died inside that fire. And until that happened, the possibility that they survived refused to die. Years turned into decades. Most unsolved mysteries slowly fade from public memory. The Sodder case did the opposite. Every passing year seemed to raise even more questions. George and Jenny refused to accept that their children had died without proof. To many people, that sounded like denial. But to George, it was common sense. The evidence simply didn't fit the official story. Then, nearly 20 years after the fire, the family received something that reignited hope. It arrived in the mail without a return address. Inside was a single photograph. The picture showed a young man in his 20s. On the back, someone had written, Louis Sodder. Beneath the name was another chilling message. I love Brother Frankie, Illil Boys. A90132 or 35. No one knew exactly what those strange numbers meant. The handwriting couldn't be traced. The envelope had been mailed from Kentucky. When George looked at the photograph, he couldn't breathe. The young man's facial features looked remarkably similar to Louis Sodder, who had disappeared as a child nearly 20 years earlier. The shape of the nose, the eyes, the jawline. Even relatives admitted the resemblance was striking. George immediately hired a private investigator. His mission was simple: travel to Kentucky, find the man in the photograph, ask one question. Are you Louis Sodder? The investigator accepted the assignment. He left, and then he vanished from the case. According to the family, he never returned, never submitted a report, never contacted them again. Whether he abandoned the investigation or discovered something he chose not to reveal remains another unanswered mystery. For George, it felt like history repeating itself. Another lead, another dead end. But the photograph remained. It still exists today. Even now, people continue comparing the young man's face with childhood photographs of Louis. Some believe the resemblance is undeniable. Others argue it's simply coincidence. No definitive answer has ever been found. As interest in the case spread across America, independent investigators began examining the original fire using modern science. Fire experts reconstructed the likely temperatures inside the Sodder home. Their conclusions surprised many people. Although the fire would have been devastating, several experts agreed it probably would not have burned hot enough or long enough to completely destroy the skeletal remains of 5 children. Modern cremations usually require temperatures approaching 400 to 800 degrees Fahrenheit for several hours. Even then, bone fragments almost always remain. The Sodder house burned for only a fraction of that time before collapsing. To many forensic specialists, the complete absence of identifiable remains remained deeply unusual. Still, not everyone agreed. Some investigators argued that the collapse of the house, combined with falling debris and the intense heat concentrated in certain areas, could explain why little evidence remained. The debate continues to this day. One theory has never disappeared: kidnapping. Supporters of this theory point to several disturbing facts: the cut telephone line, the missing ladder, the disabled trucks, the strange visitor who warned George about a fire, the insurance salesman who allegedly threatened the family, the object landing on the roof, the missing remains. Taken individually, each event might be explained away. Together, they form a pattern that many people find difficult to ignore. Another theory suggests organized crime. George's outspoken criticism of Mussolini had reportedly created bitter arguments within parts of the local Italian community. Some believe those conflicts became far more serious than anyone realized. Others reject this completely, arguing there has never been convincing evidence linking organized crime to the disappearance. Then there is perhaps the most heartbreaking possibility: that the children survived the fire, but were raised under different identities. If true, they may have grown up believing an entirely different story about who they were. They may never have known their real names, never known their parents, spent the rest of their lives searching for them, never known an entire nation wondered what became of them. George never stopped believing. Even as he grew older, his determination never faded. Visitors often described walls covered with newspaper clippings, boxes filled with documents, maps marked with possible sightings. Every conversation eventually returned to the same subject: the children. He promised himself he would never stop looking. Jenny carried the same hope. Every Christmas was painful instead of celebrating. She remembered the last time she had tucked her children into bed. She often wondered whether they were still alive somewhere, whether they thought about home, whether they remembered Christmas Eve in 1945. The famous billboard remained standing for years beside the highway. Thousands of drivers passed it every month. For many Americans, it became one of the country's most recognizable symbols of an unsolved mystery. People who had never heard of the case suddenly found themselves asking, what happened to those children? George Sodder passed away in 1969. He never learned the truth. Jenny lived for many more years. Even after age and illness made travel impossible, she continued believing that at least some of her children had survived. She wore black almost every day for the rest of her life, a quiet symbol of grief and hope. When she died in 1989, the mystery remained exactly where it had begun, unsolved. Today, nearly 80 years have passed since the Sodder home burned on Christmas Eve. The children would now be elderly adults, if they survived. Most investigators believe the truth is probably buried somewhere in the past, perhaps inside forgotten government files, perhaps inside someone's family history, or perhaps inside the memories of people who never realized what they knew. Every few years, the case returns to public attention. New documentaries, podcasts, books, online investigators examining old photographs with modern technology, age progression images attempting to show what the children might have looked like as adults. The questions never disappear, because unlike many mysteries, This one leaves behind something incredibly rare: hope. There is no undeniable proof the children died in that house. There is also no undeniable proof they escaped. The case exists in the narrow space between tragedy and possibility, between evidence and belief. Some mysteries frighten us because we know exactly what happened. Others haunt us because we never will. The Sodder Children mystery belongs to the second kind: a family celebrating Christmas, a fire that should have left answers, 5 children who vanished without a trace, a photograph that arrived decades later, and a father who spent the rest of his life refusing to stop searching. Maybe the official story is correct. Maybe the children never left that house. Or maybe, on that cold Christmas night in 1945, someone carried 5 frightened children into the darkness, and they were never seen again. If that's true, then somewhere in America, the real ending to this story may have been hidden in plain sight for nearly 8 decades. And perhaps the greatest mystery isn't how the house burned. It's why so many questions were left unanswered. Here at the Midnight Archive, we believe that some stories refuse to disappear because the truth is still waiting to be uncovered. Until that day comes, the Sodder Children mystery will remain one of the most haunting unsolved disappearances in American history. Because sometimes, the scariest part of a mystery isn't what we know, it's what we never will.